Welcome, dear listeners, to History with Herodotus, where we embark on a journey through the annals of time, uncovering the secrets of the past and shedding light upon the triumphs and tribulations of human civilization. Today, we find ourselves at the threshold of one of the most pivotal moments in modern history, the Battle of Berlin, 1945. The Battle of Berlin was the culmination of a long and arduous journey, one that began in the aftermath of World War I, when the Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh penalties on Germany, leaving the nation humiliated and economically devastated. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in the 1930s marked a significant turning point, as Germany began to reassert its military might and challenge the authority of the League of Nations. As we navigate the complex web of events that led to the Battle of Berlin, let us begin with the remilitarization of the Rhineland in March 1936, when German troops reoccupied the demilitarized zone along the French border. This bold move was met with little resistance from the Western powers, emboldening Hitler to pursue further aggression. The Anschluss, or annexation of Austria, in March 1938 marked a significant milestone on the road to war. The subsequent occupation of Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland, following the Munich Agreement on September 30, 1938, demonstrated the appeasement policy of Britain and France, which only served to whet Hitler's appetite for conquest. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed on August 23, 1939, between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, included a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe into Soviet and German spheres of influence. This pact effectively neutralized the possibility of Soviet intervention on behalf of Germany's eastern neighbors and paved the way for the invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939. As the war spread across Europe, key figures like Winston Churchill, who became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom on May 10, 1940, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the President of the United States, and Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader, navigated the treacherous landscape of international diplomacy. The Tehran Conference of 1943, where these leaders converged to discuss the post-war reorganization of Europe, marked a significant turning point in the war, as the Allies began to coordinate their efforts to bring the Nazi regime to its knees. The Soviet Union's victory at Stalingrad in February 1943, and the Allied invasion of Italy on September 9, 1943, signaled a shift in momentum against the Axis powers. The D-Day landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944, marked a crucial turning point in the war, as the Allies established a foothold in Western Europe. As the Soviet army advanced on the Eastern Front, capturing key cities like Warsaw and Budapest, the stage was set for the final confrontation with Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union's Operation Bagration, launched on June 23, 1944, resulted in the capture of Minsk and the destruction of the German Army Group Center, leaving a gaping hole in the German defenses. With the Red Army poised on the outskirts of Berlin, the city itself became a key strategic objective. The German capital was a hub of industrial and military activity, with factories producing tanks, aircraft, and other war materiel. The city's capture would deal a devastating blow to the Nazi war machine and pave the way for the Allied victory. As we explore this pivotal moment in modern history, let us begin with the Soviet Union's Operation Bagration, which had resulted in the capture of Minsk and the destruction of the German Army Group Center. This decisive victory created a gaping hole in the German defenses, leaving the city of Berlin vulnerable to attack. The Soviet army, led by General Georgy Zhukov, began to advance on the city with the goal of capturing the Reichstag and bringing an end to the Nazi regime. On April 16, 1945, the Soviet army launched a massive assault on the German lines, with over 40,000 artillery pieces and 6,000 tanks pounding the enemy positions. The German defenders, led by General Gotthard Heinrici, put up a fierce resistance, but they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. As the Soviet army pushed forward, they encountered increasingly desperate resistance from the German troops, who fought bravely, but ultimately in vain. One of the most significant events during this period was the Battle of Seelow Heights, which took place on April 16–19, 1945. This brutal and bloody battle saw the Soviet army clash with the German defenders in a series of intense and violent engagements. The Soviet army emerged victorious, but at great cost, with over 30,000 casualties suffered during the battle. As the Soviet army closed in on Berlin, the city itself became a battleground. The streets were filled with the sounds of gunfire and explosions as the German defenders fought to hold back the Soviet tide. The civilians of Berlin suffered greatly during this period, with many forced to flee their homes or take shelter in underground bunkers. On April 25, 1945, the Soviet army reached the outskirts of Berlin and the battle for the city began in earnest. The German defenders put up a fierce resistance, but they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. As the Soviet army pushed forward, they encountered increasingly desperate resistance from the German troops, who fought bravely, but ultimately in vain. One of the most iconic events during this period was the raising of the Soviet flag over the Reichstag building on May 1, 1945. This symbolized the capture of the city and marked a significant turning point in the war. The German defenders, realizing that all was lost, began to surrender in large numbers. As the battle for Berlin drew to a close, the Allied leaders began to look towards the post-war reorganization of Europe. The Yalta Conference, which had taken place in February 1945, had established the framework for the division of Europe into Eastern and Western spheres of influence. The Soviet Union, having borne the brunt of the war on the Eastern Front, would emerge as a dominant power in Eastern Europe. The capture of Berlin marked the end of the Nazi regime and paved the way for the Allied victory in Europe. As the Soviet army occupied Berlin, the city lay in ruins, its infrastructure destroyed, and its people struggling to survive. The Allied powers, led by the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, began to shape the post-war world, with the division of Europe into Eastern and Western spheres of influence. The Yalta Conference, held in February 1945, had established the framework for this division, with the Soviet Union dominating Eastern Europe and the Western Allies controlling Western Europe. In the months following the Battle of Berlin, Germany was occupied by the Allied powers, with the Soviet Union controlling the eastern sector, and the United States, Great Britain, and France controlling the western sectors. The city of Berlin itself was divided into 4 occupation zones, with the Soviet Union controlling the eastern sector and the Western Allies controlling the western sectors. The aftermath of the Battle of Berlin also saw the emergence of the Cold War, a decades-long period of tension and competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. The division of Europe into Eastern and Western blocs created a sense of unease and mistrust, with both superpowers vying for influence and control. The Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, began to consolidate its power in Eastern Europe, establishing communist governments in Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. In contrast, the Western Allies, led by the United States, began to promote democratic values and economic development in Western Europe. The Marshall Plan, launched in 1948, provided billions of dollars in economic aid to war-torn Europe, helping to rebuild infrastructure, industry, and democracy. The plan also helped to create a sense of unity and cooperation among the Western European nations, laying the foundation for the eventual creation of the European Union. The Battle of Berlin also had significant implications for the German people, who were forced to come to terms with the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime during World War II. The Nuremberg trials, held in 1945 and 1946, brought high-ranking Nazi officials to justice, providing a sense of closure and accountability for the victims of the Holocaust. The emergence of the Cold War, the division of Europe, and the promotion of democratic values all contributed to a complex and dynamic world order, with the United States and the Soviet Union vying for influence and control. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.